The morning, the joke was played, the prairie woke up hard and bright, the kind of morning that showed no mercy to weak intentions. Frost still clung to the low grass, and the wind carried the smell of hay, manure, and iron from the distant rail line. Folks said the land remembered everything. Every promise broken. Every soul turned away. That morning it remembered her. They called her clumsy long before she ever dropped a bucket or tripped over a fence rail. The word stuck because it was easy, because it made others feel steadier on their feet. She had big hands that didn't know where to rest and eyes that always seemed to be thinking one step behind the world. When the town wanted a laugh, when boredom crept in like dust through cracked windows, they pointed her toward the edge of things and waited to see what would fall. So they sent her to clean his barn. It was said with grins and nudges, spoken low so it sounded harmless. Just a little job, they told her. A favor, a way to earn her keep. But everyone knew that barn. It sat alone at the far bend of the valley, weathered gray and leaning into the wind like an old fighter who refused to lie down. The man who owned it had not taken a hired hand in years. Folks said he didn't need one. Folks also said he didn't want one. The rancher was called Calder Blackridge. His name carried weight, the way thunder does when it hasn't yet broken. He was a broken rancher in the way old timber is broken, split by storms, but still standing. A bad leg from a long-ago fall kept him from riding all day, and a past he never spoke of kept him from town. He worked his cattle alone, fixed his fences alone, and buried his dead alone. People respected him from a distance and feared crossing whatever line he had drawn around his life. That was why. The joke felt so sharp, sending the clumsy girl to Calder. Blackridge's barn was like tossing a stone at a sleeping bull. If she failed, it would be her fault. If she succeeded, no one believed it would matter. Either way, the town would have something to whisper about by sundown. She walked the long dirt road with a borrowed broom, over her shoulder in a pail that banged against her knee. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of the tools, but because she knew she was being watched in spirit if not in body. The prairie had a way of turning every walk into a test. The sky was too big. The silence too loud. When the barn finally rose before her, she stopped. It was larger than she expected, doors scarred with age, hinges dark with rust. A crow lifted off the roof and cut across the sky like a warning. Somewhere inside, a horse stamped. She swallowed and stepped forward. Calder Blackridge saw her from the shadowed doorway before she saw him. He stood still, leaning on a pitchfork, his broad shoulders filling the space as if the barn had been built around him. His face was lined deep, not from age alone but from decisions that had cost him something. One gray eye watched her carefully. The other, clouded from an old injury, stared past her into memory. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Words had a way of betraying her when she needed them most. "I was sent," she finally said, her voice low but steady. "To clean." Calder did not move. He took her in from boots worn thin to the braid pulled tight at the nape of her neck. He saw the way she stood, braced like she expected the ground to give way. He had seen that posture before, on men walking toward gunfire and women waiting for news. That would change their lives. Sent by who? He asked. She named the town. Without naming names, that was answer enough. A lesser man might have laughed. A crueler man might have turned her away. Calder did neither. He stepped aside and nodded once toward the barn's dark interior. "Start with the north stalls," he said. "Leave the tools where you find them." She nodded quickly and went to work before fear could catch up to her. The barn was cold and alive with sound. Flies buzzed. Horses shifted. Dust rose in soft clouds that made her cough. She moved carefully at first, then faster as the rhythm of the work settled into her bones. Sweep, lift, carry, repeat. She spilled water twice and dropped the broom once, her face burning each time, but she kept going. Calder watched from a distance. He told himself it was to make sure she did not hurt herself or spook the animals. He told himself many things. What he did not tell himself was why he did not send her away. When he saw the tremor in her hands or the way she flinched at sudden noise. He had spent years building walls, And yet here she was, inside his barn, breathing his air. At midday, he brought her bread and a tin cup of water. She stared at it like it was a trick. "You can eat," he said. "Doesn't cost me anything." She ate slowly, grateful and embarrassed all at once. When she thanked him, her eyes met his for a brief second, and something passed between them that neither could name. Not kindness exactly. Not pity. Recognition, maybe. By afternoon, the joke should have ended. Someone from town was expected to ride out, laughing, ready to pull her away and tell the story 10 different ways. But no one came. The sun dipped lower, painting the valley gold, and still she worked. When she finished the last stall, she stood waiting. Unsure of what came next, Calder approached, his limp more pronounced with the long day behind him. "You can go?" he said. She hesitated. They said. She began, then stopped. The words tangled and fell apart. "They said you wouldn't keep me." Calder's jaw tightened. "They don't speak for me," he said. She nodded, relief and confusion mixing in her chest. She turned toward the door, then stopped when his voice reached her again. "You come back tomorrow," he said. She faced him, startled. I know what you thought," he said. "You did good work." No one had said that to her before. She left the barn as the first stars appeared, her steps lighter than when she arrived. Calder watched until she disappeared down the road, then closed the doors and leaned his forehead against the wood. He felt something shift inside him. Something he had kept buried beneath years of silence. The town noticed the next morning when she did not return with a story of failure. They noticed more when she went back, the day after that, and the day after that. Whispers turned sharp. Smiles turned thin. The joke was no longer funny, and that made people uneasy. A clumsy girl had no right to find a place where she was wanted, and a broken rancher had no right to decide he wanted her there. On the 5th day, a rider came down the road fast, dust trailing behind him like a challenge. Calder was in the yard when the horse reined in hard, eyes wild. "This ends now," the rider said, voice loud enough to carry. "She don't belong here." Calder stepped forward, placing himself between the barn and the girl who stood frozen in the doorway. Broom still in her hands. "She stays," he said. The wind picked up, rattling the barn doors, and for the first time in years, Calder Blackridge felt the land hold its breath, waiting to see what he would risk to keep, what had found him by accident and refused to leave. The rider's words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Calder Blackridge did not raise his voice, did not reach for a weapon, did not move his feet. He simply stood there, broad and unyielding, as if the ground itself had decided to take a human shape. The girl behind him tightened her grip on the broom, knuckles pale, heart thudding so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. The rider was called Holt Rayner, a man built on noise and impatience. He swung down from his horse and let the reins drop, boots striking the dirt with purpose. Holt had grown up believing the valley belonged to men like him, men who spoke first and expected the world to step aside. His eyes flicked toward the girl, then back to Calder, and his mouth twisted in something close to disgust. "You know why she was sent," Holt said. "You know what she is?" Calder's gaze did not waver. "I know what she does," he replied. "And she works." That answer unsettled Holt more than anger would have. He shifted his weight, scanning the barn, the fences, the cattle grazing beyond. This land had history, and so did Calder. Stories traveled faster than riders in places like this. Stories of a man who once rode hard, loved hard, and lost harder. A man who had been folded by grief and never fully straightened again. The girl finally found her voice. "I can leave," she said softly, though every word felt like tearing cloth. "I don't want trouble." Calder turned slightly, just enough so she could see his face. "You already earned your place today," he said. "No one takes it from you?" Those words settled deep inside her, heavier than any promise she had ever heard. She had lived her life moving aside, shrinking into corners, learning how to be unnoticed. Now she stood at the center of something sharp and dangerous, and she did not know whether to run or stand still. Holt laughed once, short and humorless. "You think this ends here," he said. "Town won't like this." Calder nodded. "Town doesn't have to." The rider's eyes hardened. He mounted his horse and rode off without another word, dust curling behind him like a threat left unfinished. When the sound faded, the valley seemed to breathe again, though the tension did not ease. It sank into the soil, into the beams of the barn, into the space between the two people who remained. That evening, Calder said little. He fixed a loose hinge while the girls swept the yard, both of them aware that something had shifted. She wanted to ask why he defended her, why he let her stay when others would not. He wanted to ask her why she tried so hard in a world that never rewarded her effort. Neither spoke. Her name was Alawan Cross. She had not chosen it. It had been given to her by a mother who believed names carried hope, even when life did not. Alawan had grown up on the edge of town, daughter of a man who vanished one winter and a woman who wore exhaustion like a second skin. From a young age, Alawan learned that mistakes were remembered longer than kindness. She learned that people decided who you were early, and rarely changed their minds. Calder knew something about that. Long before the limp. Before the clouded eye, before the barn became his only company. He had been known as a man others followed. Calder Blackridge had ridden with purpose, built his ranch with his own hands, and dreamed of more than survival. Then came the fire. The night the sky burned orange, and the wind carried screams instead of rain. The details stayed locked behind his ribs, but the weight never left him. Alawan sensed the sorrow in him without knowing its shape. She saw it in the way he paused before entering the house, as if bracing himself. She heard it in the quiet hours when the wind pressed against the walls and he did not sleep. Being around him felt like standing near a deep river. Calm on the surface, dangerous beneath. Days passed, each one tightening the unseen knot. People from town began riding by more often, pretending to check fences or count cattle. Their eyes followed Alawan as she worked, measuring, judging. Some whispered warnings. Others smiled in ways that made her skin prickle. Calder noticed everything. He began keeping a rifle closer than before, not out of fear, but readiness. One afternoon, an older woman arrived, her horse slow and steady. She introduced herself as Mercy Hollow, voice firm as oak. She had lived longer than most in the valley and buried more secrets than she admitted. Mercy looked at Alawan with a gaze that missed nothing, then turned to Calder. "You stirring old waters," Mercy said. Calder did not deny it. "Didn't mean to." "Never do," Mercy replied. "But water moves all the same." She stayed only a short while, leaving behind a warning wrapped in concern. As she rode away, Alawan felt the weight of the valley press closer. She was no longer invisible. That frightened her more than cruelty ever had. That night, a stone struck the side of the barn. Then another. Calder was on his feet instantly. Rifle in hand, Alawan close behind him, despite his sharp look telling her to stay back. They stepped into the dark, the moon half hidden by cloud. Shapes moved at the edge of the yard, voices low and rough. "Send her back," someone called. "This ain't right." Calder raised his rifle, not pointing, just holding it where it could be seen. "Go home," he said. The shapes retreated, laughter following them like rot. When the night finally quieted, Alawan realized she was shaking. Calder noticed too. He set the rifle aside and handed her a blanket without a word. It was the first time anyone had protected her without asking for something in return. Sleep did not come easy after that. In the following days, Calder began teaching her more than chores. How to read the weather by the way birds flew. How to calm a spooked horse with steady hands. How to mend wire so it held through winter. Alawan listened, absorbed, learned. Her clumsiness faded when she was given time instead of ridicule. Still, the tension grew. Holt Rayner returned, not alone this time. He brought men who believed order was something you enforced, not questioned. They spoke of tradition, of roles, of knowing your place. Calder listened, his face carved from stone. Alawan stood behind him again, heart pounding, aware that every step forward carried risk. "You can't keep her here forever," Holt said. "This valley won't allow it." Calder's answer was slow, deliberate. "I'm not asking permission." The wind rose, carrying dust and the distant lowing of cattle. Alawan felt the land watching, waiting. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. only that the joke that sent her here had turned into something far more dangerous. And as Calder Blackridge stood firm against the growing storm, one truth became clear: whatever was coming would demand a price, and the valley would decide who was strong enough to pay it. The valley held its breath that week. Dust settled slowly, birds circled cautiously, and the cattle moved with a watchfulness they rarely displayed. Calder Blackridge and Allawan Cross had settled into a rhythm, the kind that felt fragile under the weight of eyes and whispers. Work filled their days, but each hammer strike, each sweep of the broom carried a tension that could snap in a heartbeat. Allawan noticed the way. Calder's gaze lingered at the horizon more than usual. It was not the horizon itself that worried him, it was the uncertainty he could feel pressing from the town. Holt Raynor's threat still hung over them like a shadow that stretched farther than it should. Rumors had begun to circulate, too fast and too wild, about why she stayed, why Calder let her stay, and what he was planning next. Townsfolk whispered about danger, about scandal, about things neither of them could control. One morning, a rider approached from the north, dust rolling in waves across the dry ground. His name was Silas Bronte, a messenger of sorts who dealt in information and favors. He carried no weapon, just words and a face that had learned to read every twitch, every hesitation. He slowed as he neared the barn, eyes scanning Allawan and Calder like a hawk inspecting a fledgling. "You're stirring more than dust." "Calder," Silas said, voice low but sharp. "Town's talking, and they don't like what they hear." Calder's hands were steady as he adjusted a fence rail. "Let them talk. I don't answer to the town." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Not answering doesn't make it go away." "They're sending people. Men who don't care what's fair." Allawan's pulse quickened. She had learned to carry herself without showing fear, but the words made her chest tighten. The valley itself seemed to press closer, a silent witness to something she did not yet understand. Calder noticed her tension and placed a firm hand on her shoulder, grounding her without saying a word. As Silas left, the sense of unease lingered. That afternoon, while tending to the horses, Allawan overheard two townsmen by the edge of the pasture, voices low and urgent. "He won't give her up," one said. "Not without a fight. And Blackridge isn't a man you challenge lightly." The others spat on the ground. "She don't belong there. She's just a girl." Allawan's fists clenched. She had spent her life proving the world wrong, but here it was, judging her again, deciding her worth before she had a chance to speak. She wanted to answer back, but Calder's presence reminded her of patience, of quiet strength. Sometimes strength spoke louder than words, and she had begun to understand that. As days passed, subtle shifts began to ripple across the valley. Cattle were found spooked at odd hours, fences were cut, and strange tracks appeared near the barn. Allawan began to worry that the threats were no longer only words. Calder, however, remained composed, teaching her how to anticipate danger, how to read the land, how to move silently when necessary. One evening, after a long day of mending fences, Calder led her toward the back of the barn. There, hidden under a pile of hay, were tools and provisions he had gathered over years, items meant to survive hard winters. "If things get rough," he said, "you need to know how to take care of yourself. Not because I doubt you, but because the world might." Allawan studied the supplies, realizing how little she had ever been prepared. Calder's intentions were practical, but they carried an unspoken lesson. Survival was not about strength alone. It was about foresight, patience, and courage. Meanwhile, in town, Holt Raynor's frustration grew. He could not understand why Calder refused to yield. Why the girl who had been a joke now held a place at the ranch as if she belonged. Holt's pride was wounded, and his network of allies began to stir. They had plans to reclaim the valley in their way, and they did not care about Allawan's safety, nor Calder's reasons for standing firm. Allawan, meanwhile, discovered she was not as powerless as she had been told. Each day she grew more confident in her hands, her instincts, and her mind. Calder noticed it too. There were moments when he allowed her to handle tasks alone, watch over the barn, and even guide the horses. He did so not because she demanded trust, but because she earned it through effort, focus, and a determination he rarely witnessed. Late one night, as the wind howled across the ridge, Elawin sat by the barn, tracing the scars in the wood. She wondered what it was about this man and this land that made her feel more alive than she ever had. She had spent so long running, hiding, and shrinking, and now she felt seen not for what she lacked, but for what she could become. Calder came out silently, leaning against the barn door. "Thinking again," he said. She nodded. "About them. About everything." He studied her quietly. "They won't give up. And neither will you, I can see that." "I don't want to be a burden," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. "You're not a burden," Calder said. "You never were. Not here." The night deepened, and shadows moved among the hills. Elawin realized that the valley held more than cattle and fences. It held stories, secrets, and dangers that had long been ignored. She had stepped into a world she didn't fully understand, and yet she had a role to play, one she was beginning to see as vital. Days later, a message arrived on a swift horse, bearing news from outside the valley. Calder opened it in private, reading with a furrowed brow. The words were brief but urgent. "The council is deciding. They will act soon." Elawin saw the change immediately. Calder's steady composure had cracks now. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. The valley itself seemed to sense the coming storm. Elawin knew she had to prepare herself for more than chores and cattle. She had to be ready for what humans could bring, for the cruelty that had sent her to the barn as a joke. The town, the council, Holt Rayner, and others, all of them were pieces of a larger conflict she had yet to grasp fully. That night, while the stars hid behind clouds, she lay awake listening to the wind. She thought of her past, of every mistake that had been labeled her own, of every hand that had pointed and laughed. And she thought of Calder, whose presence had begun to feel like a shield she did not deserve but could not deny. By dawn, she was at the barn, waiting. Calder emerged from the house, rifle slung across his back, eyes scanning the horizon. They did not speak much, words being unnecessary between them now. They had come to understand each other through action, through shared labor, through the silent acknowledgement that neither could turn back. It was then that Elawin heard the hoofbeats. Not one horse, but several, riding fast and low, kicking dust into the valley. Calder's hand went to the rifle, but his eyes did not waver from the approaching shapes. The riders slowed at the edge of the yard, their faces shadowed by hats and determination. They carried no messages, no warnings, only intent. Holt Rayner was among them, flanked by men who had trained themselves in intimidation and control. They had come not to talk, not to bargain, but to enforce a world that did not want Elawin there. Calder stepped forward, square-shouldered, the weight of the land and the past pressing him into place. Elawin's heart raced. She felt fear, yes, but also a strange surge of resolve. She had been the clumsy girl, the joke, the outsider. Now she stood at the center of a storm, and for the first time, she realized that stepping back was no longer an option. Holt's voice rang out, cutting through the stillness. "This ends today. She goes, or there's trouble." Calder's reply was calm, steady, and immovable. "She stays." A tense silence stretched across the yard. The horses shifted uneasily. The wind caught the edge of the barn doors, and Elawin felt a shiver run down her spine. She did not know what would happen next, only that whatever came, it would test every lesson Calder had taught her and every ounce of courage she possessed. As the sun rose higher, the valley waited, and so did she, knowing that the next moment could change everything. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying the scent of dust and sweat as the riders drew closer. Holt Rayner's gang moved with the precision of men who had learned to expect obedience rather than question it. Calder Blackridge stood in the middle of the yard, rifle heavy in his hands, body tense but unwavering. Beside him, Elawin Cross tightened her braid, her eyes sharp and alert. Her heartbeat thrumming in rhythm with the distant pounding of hooves. The tension was almost unbearable. Even the cattle sensed it, moving restlessly, nostrils flaring, ears swiveling at every sound. The barn, which had once been just wood and straw, now seemed alive with the weight of anticipation. Shadows shifted across the walls, the valley itself holding its breath. Elowen glanced at Calder. His jaw was set, his gray eye steady on Holt, the other clouded but clear in determination. He would not falter. She drew in a slow breath, feeling courage build from the roots of her fear. Holt raised his hand, signaling a halt. "Step aside, Blackridge," he called. His voice was firm, but there was an edge that betrayed anger and uncertainty. "This girl doesn't belong here. You know it." Calder did not move. He did not flinch. "She belongs where she earns her place," he said, voice low, unwavering. "And she's earned it." Elowen felt a strange surge of pride. She had worked hard, learned quickly, and shown a strength she had never known she possessed. And yet, seeing the crowd of men, knowing they were armed with anger and intention, reminded her how fragile her world could be. One wrong move, one misstep, and everything could unravel. The men whispered among themselves, the tension thickening with every breath. Holt's eyes were sharp, darting between Calder and Elowen, searching for a weakness. He did not find one. Not in Calder's stance, not in Elowen's calm, and not in the barn that had become more than shelter. It had become a fortress of resilience. Elowen's mind raced as she remembered the lessons Calder had given her. Read the land. Anticipate the danger, stay calm when chaos arrives. She had practiced for days under his watchful eye, learning how to handle the animals, the tools, even herself. But now, all that training would be tested in ways she could not fully predict. A sudden movement caught her eye, a shadow slipping along the fence line. One of Holt's men had tried to flank them. Calder reacted instantly, stepping between the barn and the approaching figure. His rifle clicked as it came to rest against his shoulder, but he did not fire. He didn't need to. The man froze, realizing the strength of Calder's resolve. Elowen felt a thrill run through her, a mixture of fear and determination. She realized she was no longer the girl who tripped over fences, who dropped buckets, who was the punchline of every joke. She was part of something bigger. Her presence mattered. Her courage mattered. And now she could see the storm looming clearly, threatening to strike at any moment. Holt's voice cut through the tension again. "Blackridge, this is your last chance. Let her go." Calder's response was measured, unyielding. "She stays." The silence that followed was deafening. The wind whispered through the valley, and even the horses seemed to sense the imminence of a confrontation. Elowen's hands tightened on the broom she had carried like a shield for so many days, and she felt a pulse of energy she hadn't known before. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for? The moment that would define everything. Suddenly, one of Holt's men stepped forward, brash and reckless. He lunged toward the barn door, intending to grab Elowen and force her out. Calder reacted with a speed that belied his years and his injury. He intercepted the man, the rifle pressing against the attacker's chest. The man froze, realizing too late that intimidation alone could not move Calder. Blackridge. Elowen stepped back, watching as Calder's resolve radiated like heat. She wanted to rush to help, but Calder's eyes met hers and held her in place. "Stay," he seemed to say. "Stand your ground. Trust what you have learned." Holt's gang hesitated, uncertainty flickering across their faces. They had expected resistance, yes, but not this kind of defiance. Calder was more than a man protecting his land. He was a force of will, and Elowen's presence made him stronger, more determined. She realized that her own courage lent him power, and together they formed a barrier that could not easily be broken. The tension stretched long into the afternoon. Words were exchanged, challenges thrown, but no one moved decisively. Each man was weighing the risk, each heart beating faster with anticipation. Elowen felt a strange clarity amidst the chaos. She could see the fear behind Holt's anger, the hesitation in the men who had come to intimidate. And she understood, for the first time, that strength was not only in arms or skill, but in presence, in belief, in standing firmly for what was right. As the sun dipped low, painting the valley in gold and shadow, a sudden noise drew everyone's attention, a sharp whistle from the ridge above. Calder's eyes flicked upward, recognizing the signal immediately. It was Mercy Hollow, the older woman who had warned him before. And now she was returning with others, their faces resolute. Hands ready, the sudden appearance of reinforcements shifted the balance, but it did not end the danger. Holt Rayner's jaw tightened, anger flaring, as he realized he was no longer facing just Calder alone. The valley seemed to hold its breath again. The world narrowing down to this single moment of confrontation, where every decision mattered, and every misstep could cost more than just pride. Eowyn took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her boots. She remembered the first day she had stepped into the barn, how small and clumsy she had felt. Now she stood ready, her hands steady, her heart unflinching. She had learned to move with purpose, to anticipate, to endure. And she had learned that she was not alone. The wind rose, carrying the scent of dust, hay, and distant rain. Shadows shifted across the valley floor, flickering with the movement of men and horses. Every muscle in Calder's body was coiled, every nerve attuned to the possibility of attack. Holt's gang murmured among themselves, tension twisting their movements. They could sense the shift, the uncertainty, the possibility that this confrontation might not go as they had expected. Eowyn noticed small details that spoke volumes, a horse pawing the ground nervously, a man's hand twitching near a holster, the way Calder's eye caught every movement with precision. She realized that she could act, that she could contribute, that her presence was not just symbolic but practical. She had a role to play, one that mattered more than she had ever imagined. The sun was just above the horizon when Holt Rayner made his move. He shouted, spurring his horse forward, and the men behind him followed with a mix of fear and aggression. Calder lifted his rifle, steady, calm, prepared for the fight he had anticipated for days. Eowyn gripped the broom tighter, her breath coming slow and measured. She felt the valley itself tense, the air thick with expectation. In that moment, everything hung suspended. The world narrowed to the standoff between Calder, Eowyn, and Holt Rayner's men. Every instinct, every lesson, every ounce of courage they possessed would be tested. The barn, the valley, and the horizon seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the storm to break. Eowyn's mind flashed back to the day she had been sent as a joke, to the fear and shame she had carried, to the disbelief that anyone could see worth in her. Now she stood at the center of the storm, no longer invisible, no longer a joke. She had earned this place, and she would fight to keep it. The first rider closed in, hooves kicking up dust, the tension stretching to a breaking point. Calder's finger hovered near the trigger. Eowyn squared her shoulders, ready for whatever came next. The valley itself seemed to tremble as the moment approached. The climax of a struggle that had begun with ridicule and fear, and now roared toward a decisive confrontation. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that intertwined with the figures on the valley floor. Every heartbeat, every breath, every glance carried the weight of what was to come. And as the riders drew near, Eowyn realized that everything she had learned, everything Calder had taught her, and everything she had endured led to this single moment. It was the calm before the storm, the tension before the breaking point. And though no one knew how it would end, every eye, every soul, every breath in the valley braced for the moment when courage, defiance, and heart would collide in a way that could change everything. The first clash never came. As Holt Rayner's horse surged forward, Calder's calm, steady presence radiated something the men could not confront: unshakable determination. Riders faltered mid-stride, eyes darting at the valley around them, the barn behind Calder, and the girl standing firm at his side. Eowyn felt a thrill of power and fear intertwining. She realized then that courage could ripple, that her steadiness could strengthen another's resolve. The men on horseback slowed, confusion replacing their aggression. "You don't understand the land," Calder said, voice carrying across the dust. "You don't understand what's earned here or how it's protected." "She stays." Holt Rayner's jaw tightened, and for a moment silence stretched, thick and heavy. The wind rustled through the valley grass, carrying the scent of earth and hope. The riders looked at each other, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. They had expected Calder to bend or fear, and instead they faced unwavering will, reinforced by the girl they had tried to ridicule. Then came the sound of reinforcements, distant but growing closer. Mercy Hollow led a small group of townsfolk, those who respected Calder, those who had seen him protect his land and knew his judgment. They rode into the valley, faces stern but eyes warm with resolve. The balance shifted. The men who had ridden to intimidate now felt the weight of witnesses, of a community unwilling to allow injustice. Alawan realized, in that instant, that she was part of something greater than herself. Not only was she standing for her own place, but she was standing for fairness, for the recognition that courage and worth were not decided by rumor or jest. The valley seemed to lean with her, the wind softening as though the land itself approved. Holt Rayner's voice cracked as he shouted commands. But the will of the valley of Calder. And now the townsfolk pressed in around him. One by one, the men lowered their heads, realizing that force would not win here. Respect had been earned, and it could not be taken by intimidation. Calder stepped forward slightly, rifle still in hand but lowered. "Go home," he said, voice calm, carrying the weight of the earth itself. "You've lost your fight before it began." Holt Rayner glared at him, fury and frustration battling the acknowledgement of defeat. He turned his horse, leaving behind his men, dust trailing in the evening sun. One by one they followed, a quiet surrender to a strength they could not break. Alawan exhaled deeply, feeling her body release tension she hadn't realized she had been holding. Calder's steady hand rested on her shoulder for a brief moment, grounding her, acknowledging the courage she had shown. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. She had grown from the girl who had been mocked into someone capable, someone integral to the heart of the ranch. That night the barn was quiet, save for the soft breathing of the horses and the crackling of a small fire Calder had built. They sat together, tending to minor wounds and soothing frayed nerves. Calder offered her a piece of bread, and she smiled, realizing that these small acts of care were victories as well. They had endured, they had stood firm, and now they could begin to breathe. In the following days, the valley returned to its rhythm. The cattle grazed peacefully, the fences held strong, and the barn, once the scene of mockery, became a symbol of resilience. Townsfolk who had whispered and judged now nodded respectfully as they passed Calder and Alawan, no longer questioning their right to exist there. No longer laughing at what they had once dismissed as a joke. Alawan learned more each day. Not just about the land, but about herself. She learned how to read the sky for storms, how to coax a frightened horse, how to anticipate danger before it arrived. But more importantly, she learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Calder had shown her that, and she had embraced it fully one afternoon. Mercy Hollow returned, this time with advice and encouragement. "You've done more than survive," she said. "You've earned respect, and you've shown the land and the people that courage matters more than gossip. Remember that." Alawan nodded, understanding that respect was a gift, but courage was earned. She glanced at Calder, who watched her with a quiet pride that had nothing to do with words. They had both changed in subtle ways. Calder had opened himself to trust again, and she had discovered a strength she hadn't known existed. As the weeks passed, the barn and ranch thrived. The chores, once daunting, became routine, and the valley seemed to embrace them. Neighbors brought supplies, children waved as they passed by, and the town slowly accepted that the clumsy girl who had once been a joke now belonged to the land. She had earned. Alawan and Calder worked side by side, learning from one another, laughing quietly at shared frustrations, and finding comfort in simple routines. Every day carried proof that patience, effort, and steadfastness could change perception, could turn ridicule into respect, could transform fear into confidence. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and painted the sky in gold and crimson, Calder and Alawan stood on a small rise overlooking the valley. Horses grazed below, the wind carried the scent of hay and earth, and the barn stood sturdy, a testament to endurance. "You've changed things," Alawan said softly, her eyes sweeping the land. Calder's voice was quiet, thoughtful. "No," he said. "You've changed things. I just stood beside you. You showed the strength I had buried." Alawan smiled, feeling warmth she had never known. The valley had tested her, the town had doubted her, and the storm of conflict had almost consumed them. But now, standing there, she understood the truth. Courage and perseverance could carve out a place where none seemed possible. As the stars appeared, she felt the weight of the past lighten. The girl who had been mocked had found a home, a purpose, and a protector who believed in her worth. And Calder, the man who had once carried only loss and solitude, had found companionship and a renewed sense of hope. The town would remember this story, but not as a joke. They would remember the girl who worked tirelessly, the rancher who refused to yield, and the lesson that worth is not given lightly, but earned through courage, determination, and integrity. Lawmen touched the weathered wood of the barn, feeling the scars and strength it carried. "We belonged here," she whispered. Calder's hand found hers briefly, a silent affirmation. They both knew it was true. The valley settled into evening calm. Horses nickered softly, wind rustled through the grass. And the barn, once a site of ridicule, now symbolized resilience, hard work, and the bond that had formed between two unlikely allies. Lawmen and Calder walked back toward the house, side by side, the setting sun casting long shadows behind them. She realized that life could be harsh, that people could be cruel, but that courage, loyalty, and steadfastness could create a home where once there was only doubt. That night, as they sat by the fire, the valley quiet around them, Lawmen allowed herself a deep, unshakable peace. The world had tried to define her, to mock her, to send her away, but she had endured. She had grown, she had earned, and she had found a place where she truly belonged. Calder watched the fire, reflecting on the days past, the threats faced, the lessons learned. He had protected his land, yes, but more than that, he had allowed trust and hope back into his life. In Lawmen, he saw courage, resilience, and the possibility of new beginnings. The stars shone bright over the valley, the wind whispering promises of future days, of steady routines, and of challenges met with quiet strength. The barn stood firm, the land alive with possibility, and two souls who had once been defined by fear and isolation now shared a bond that neither the valley nor the town could undo. Lawmen lay awake that night, listening to the gentle rhythm of the ranch, feeling the pulse of life around her. She thought of all the days she had feared failure, all the moments she had doubted herself, and all the times the world had laughed. Now she felt something stronger, belonging, purpose, and a certainty that she had proven herself, not just to others but to herself. The valley had tested them. The storms had passed, and the barn had been transformed from a place of mockery to a sanctuary of resilience. Calder and Lawmen, once strangers brought together by circumstance, now stood united in their triumph over doubt, fear, and ridicule. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the valley in warm light, Lawmen stepped outside and breathed deeply. The wind carried the scent of hay and earth, the cattle grazed peacefully, and the barn stood, a monument to courage, perseverance, and the unyielding strength of human spirit. She turned to Calder, whose presence had become a steadfast anchor, and smiled, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The world had tried to push her down, but she had risen. The barn, the valley, and the rancher who had refused to let her go were proof. And in that truth, Lawmen Cross, once mocked and overlooked, found her happy ending. She belonged. They both did. And the valley, alive and eternal, would always remember.